Are you tired of playing by the rules? Tired of doing what you're supposed to when all you really want to do is burn the damn rule book and start fresh? I get it. I've done it more than once. And let me tell you, freedom tastes better than approval ever could. Welcome to a Gypsy Rebel, the podcast for those who crave more creativity, more space, more of your own damn life on your own terms. I am Jacqueline Van Bierk, aka Pink Star, a musician, artist, traveler, and professional rule breaker, bringing you real, unfiltered conversations about reinvention, confidence, and making space for what actually matters. So grab a coffee, a tea, something a little stronger, because this is where the rebellion begins. Have you ever wondered how to use your trauma, your pain, your depression, your anxiety, and transform that, channel that energy into something that can bring you joy and get you out of that dark space? My special guest, Fae West, has a story to share that is so empowering and so beautiful that we all have creativity inside of us. And some of us are afraid to explore it or even doubt that we have that inside of us. So join me for this conversation to hopefully find your spark and get inspired to do something that you may have never done before, but always kind of dared to do. This is your wake up call. So, with no further ado, here's my artist friend, Fae West. Well, hello, Faye. So nice to meet you and have you on my podcast. You're definitely a Gypsy Rebel, and I love for you to share your story. You are from Melbourne, and which is so exciting. Most of us are in America, probably. How did you get to where you are right now, and your struggles that you've overcome? And there's quite some stuff to unpack. So I'll hand you the mic.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I am in Melbourne. Melbourne is traditionally known as Nam. And just to start, I just want to offer my respects to the Indigenous people of the lands on which I live and work. And I acknowledge these as unceded lands. And I live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the greater Kulin Nation. And I also like to share that I am an Australian born Maori woman, and being born outside of Aotearoa, it's been a journey for me to connect with my culture, connect with my heritage, and that thread is really woven into my creative work. I Before I had a creative practice, I always wanted to be an artist. That was this clear thing. I see that as like a gift from the universe to me, that language, that vision, that identity, because that was my beacon through really rough seas. I had a very challenging childhood. I grew up in a violent home and experienced trauma outside of the family home as well at a young age, and really had this kind of trajectory of, stacks on in my life when it came to traumatic experiences. And compounding that as well was intergenerational trauma and the impacts of colonization and the disconnection that was there in, both on my mother's side and father's side in terms of having Maori ancestry. It's something that my dad never wanted me to identify as.
Hmm.
And that's huge, having that disconnection coming, from within the family. And it was also something that has been reflected back to me, from being a child through to a teenager, even in my early 20s, when Indigenous recognition started to gather a lot of momentum and expand into more of a social dialogue here in what is known as Australia. Um, I had friends supporting that movement, but in another breath telling me that I wasn't Maori, I wasn't born there. Like, how much are you? What percentage kind of thing. So it's been a really interesting journey. And when I started my creative practice, I didn't hold that identity and I didn't see that identity in my work, even for myself. But my hands were always trying to do something that my head didn't understand. Like, at a really difficult time in my life, and I love working with found objects and salvaged objects. And I love kind of, foraging in the urban environment for inspiration and reworking things. And I found this, I don't even know what it was. It was like made from all of these thin wooden sticks. It might have been like a lampshade or a laundry basket or something. But I'd pulled it apart and then I was playing with this twine, but I was trying to do something that my mind like didn't understand. My hands were just trying to do this thing. And it wasn't until a few years after that experience with that object that I started weaving, and I had started collecting plastic box strapping. Everyone knows this. This is like a universal material. When you get like a big box of paper or pamphlets or something heavy, like your TV, like anything electronic, usually has those plastic straps on them. And I was living and working in Marybeck in um, Melbourne, which is a really like creative space, and started collecting all these plastics off the ground. But even before I knew what I would do with them, and I started to weave them, and I wove, these two things, one thing that fits in one, like, the palm of your hand. And then the next thing was I somehow got a public art project and had proposed to do this gigantic weaving and didn't even know if I would be able to complete it in time or how much material. But that was the genesis of my, public art practice, and having this really intuitive relationship to the concepts that came through and responding to the urban space, taking, from the urban space, this kind of trash, and transforming it through the practice of weaving and sharing it back. But even then, it took me a couple of years to kind of reflect on what I was doing and the way that that connected to my Maori ancestry and culture, and go, oh my God, of course I'm a weaver. Of course I'm a weaver. And of course I'm, telling stories through this practice of weaving. So that's been an interesting um, methodology to have as well. And I love the like textile making and that practice. It's kind of different. Like, there's a tactility to textiles that are fabricated from salvaged plastic that's very different to other textile practices. And to bring that into public space, there's these different threads of dialogue that I haven't framed my work into. There's so many ways of seeing my work, and that deeply personal journey of the way that my creative practice has been a vehicle for me to connect with myself and my ancestors isn't something that I've really brought forward in the way that I frame my work. So I'm only just starting to do that now after a decade of making work. And starting to work with weaving as a methodology, not just as a physical practice, but as a conceptual methodology as well. So my newest work, which is I'm installing in a couple of weeks, is actually a audiovisual installation, and it has other physical elements in the space, and there'll be some image-based works as well that connect to that, are drawn from the imagery in the work. But to me, that still is like created through this methodology of weaving. There's these different elements in the space, and they're kind of speaking to one another. And I actually find video editing and audio editing to be very similar to weaving. When you break
Mm.
down what you're doing, you're taking these different threads and kind of combining them.
Wow, that is so not only interesting, but when I try to imagine what you're doing, I feel this is so left field. This is so cool that what when you finally found your thing, right? Like, what was that? Just and like you were saying, you still didn't quite understand, right? It was just like totally, completely following your calling, like not questioning it, because a lot of times I think we question it because we like, oh, I don't know, who's gonna like that, right? It comes from that external approval first, versus like coming from the
Yes.
inside where it's like, yeah, this is what I do. And I think I've been to art shows where I see people just like using recycled. I'm always so blown away. I'm like, wow, who came up with that? This is so interesting because we can, in general, nature is art, right? Whenever you walk around, everywhere you
Mm-hmm.
go, if you're really aware, you can tell, like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. This looks like a piece of art. It's just like a tree, but the way the branches are, And or I've done what you do, except I didn't do art with it. I would just take something thinking for a while I was saving the cartridges for the eggs. I was like, there's got to be
Mm-hmm.
something I can do with this. This is, I don't want to throw this out. And so to find something that someone may consider garbage and you repurposing it for something that can be enjoyed, that is absolutely brilliant. Was that in your process of healing your traumas? Was that really your form of therapy, or did you have some therapy?
Mm.
How did that process?
That's such a great question. I have a really interesting answer to that. So I had been engaging in different, just kind of, very Western talk therapy slash counseling intermittently since I was a teenager. And it never really got me where I needed it to take me.
Right.
And I went through a really traumatic year in my mid 20s. I was at art school. So I kind of had finally, after a couple of attempts, I was actually immersed in it. And I was confused because I was like, I'm meant to be really happy. Like I'm finally at the art school where I wanted to be, doing what I've always wanted to do. But yet I was struggling with my mental health. And what I reflect on now is that the process of being embodied, because this was a studio based art school, I was drawing for 9 hours a week. We painted, I was doing
Mm,
printmaking. It was that
mm,
first year where we're doing everything, sculpture as well. I was so in my head because I was disconnected from my body through the trauma.
yes.
So the process of being and making and doing was bringing up a lot of the stuff. And I started seeing, I had a really great psychologist at the time, and it was this really potent time in my life too, because at that time I didn't know. I was so conditioned from what I had been through that I did not recognize it as traumatic. I didn't think, I was kind of conditioned and told that there was nothing wrong with me, and that, it was just so normalized in what I had experienced, even though I could consciously see, compare and contrast myself to others,
Mm.
she had to sort of sit there and basically like, she didn't, but like, intellectually kind of shake me to be like, no, this is big. Not everyone lives through that. And she actually taught me tapping,
Oh yeah, I
which
love
I
tapping.
find like EFT,
Mm-hmm.
was really amazing. And I did a bit with her, but I came back to that in another cycle in my life too. But so all of that was starting to go on. And then towards the end of that year and that first year of art school, my best friend passed away.
Ooh.
And it was so like this wave of grief. And I was determined to kind of go with the grief. And what I didn't want, because of how significant she had been to me in my life, like we connected later. We didn't go to the same high school, so we were sort of like knew each other towards the end of high school and worked together. But she was instrumental in being the kind of person that helped me to believe that I could be an artist and do whatever I wanted. Like, she opened my eyes to the world, but also to who I was beyond the weight of what I had come from, right? Like, she saw my soul rather than everything in this life. And I was just swept up with that. So the art school fell away, and then it was this really challenging year of, kind of coming together with this friendship circle, but kind of also being pulled apart because everyone deals with grief in their own way. And I wanted to confront it head on, and a lot of people wanted to kind of bury their head in the sands about it. And towards the end of that year, there was another traumatic experience, deeply personal. And I actually went to see a spiritual healer a couple of times and had a few sessions with her just to kind of like hold myself through that. And I just said to her, I was like, I'm exhausted, this year or more of grieving on top of everything that had already been coming up. Like, I don't know how to locate myself in my life or like what I want to do. Like, I know I want to be an artist, but I can't keep working, in hospitality and jobs that like are hurting me, and having to kind of falsely connect with people constantly. And she said to me, she was like, have you heard of this school? And have you heard of, art therapy? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of art therapy and people have suggested that to me. And she gave me the details. It wasn't running in that time. I was in Sydney. So within 4 weeks of this session, and she telling me about this particular course in art therapy. I'd been to Melbourne, like I did a day trip to Melbourne and did the interview for the school, got into that course, organized somewhere to stay. And then I was just like, boom, I was in Melbourne. And it was this like complete shift and change in location. I'd only been to Melbourne twice before in my life. So it was this huge leap of faith into kind of following that path, which that trajectory had actually been set, more than 12 months before when I surrendered into that grief. I really believe that if I hadn't surrendered into the grief and just gone, I'm going to go with this and where it takes me.
Yep.
And it took me from one city to another. Like, I was in a different place than Sydney and I went back to Sydney to be with the friends. And then beyond that, I was like, nah, something really needs to change. And I found Melbourne, Naarm to be at that time just, it was like there was still a big city, there was all this stuff going on, but it was like someone just turned down the volume. My nervous system had some
Mm.
more space to breathe. Things like the pace was just a little bit slower, and I was able to sort of slow down. And I was also, without being surrounded by people that I knew because I didn't know anyone, I had the freedom to really recreate my own identity. And then that overlapped with starting a course in transpersonal or spiritual art therapy. And I surprised myself and maybe the class too on the very first day where we're all sitting there and we go around in a circle and like, why are you here? Like, what do you want to get out of this? What do you want to do with this course that we're about to embark on? And I genuinely believed, and I do, like that I was there because I wanted to learn that practice so that I could support other people and help other people. But the first thing that came out of my mouth was, I'm here to heal my relationship to my own creativity. And I was like, whoa, okay. Because at that
Love
time, I
it.
wasn't practicing. I'd been to art school, but I didn't have a practice. I felt like I was at sea, and, you know, it was a really powerful moment to go, that's what I'm here for in this moment with this course. My direction is to heal
Mhm.
my relationship to my creativity. And I see that as a foundation too for how can I work with that practice and support others if I haven't made that connection for myself yet.
Yeah. I think that artists, I love everything you said was so powerful because art heals, right? But a lot of times we stop ourselves either because we've been told as an early child, you're not talented, you don't have it, when in reality, everybody has something creative in them, and creativity is not just
100%.
making art. Creativity can also be cleaning your home, decorating your home,
Exactly.
anything like taking a different route to work, being thinking or something breaks and you figure something out. So I think it's a problem solving skill, in a way. And
100%.
I just love what you said. The same with the tapping. I haven't done tapping in a while, but I love that you mentioned that again because I used to do it and I love it. It's so powerful.
Yeah,
Don't you agree that the simple little things that most of us are at least aware of, maybe not know everything about it, but aware of, right? Can't they make a huge change in your life as you've experienced?
100%. 100%. And what I love about creativity, so the role that it's played in my life, but the way that when we turn towards it and we acknowledge that it has a healing capacity, a transformative capacity, what you're really doing, whether you practice that with guidance, with a therapist, with a coach, in
Mhm.
whatever context, or if it's just you and yourself, exploring, experimenting, or if you're an artist and you have a creative practice, you're conditioning yourself that you have access to like a boundless resource. Like creativity doesn't run out. Sure, we have moments where we might feel like creatively blocked, and like I've gone through a pause in my like external creative practice, but I'm still creative and connected to my creativity. And so I think, beyond, I think that people are really conditioned to see creativity as like a results based thing. Like, what's the output rather than the journey or the relationship that you have to it.
Yes. Yes.
And it's the relationship that is the heal where the healing is. Like, sure, like it's you get something out of the output 100%. But I think for people who go, "Oh, I'm not creative," I'm like, you're choosing, like you're cutting your own arm off. Like, there's that's innate. So you're kind of it's that like, a lot of people are talking about with the digital era and how we're kind of locked in and our attention is being like focused on consuming content, or even our, relationship to consumption of items in the world,
Hmm.
and all of that kind of whole paradigm. But a part of that, like if we look at that, and I'm not blaming individuals, but individuals have the choice to make to stay in their agency and to stay connected to their creative power and energy and intent to be able to shape what they desire for themselves and their community. but it starts with you, like we can't hope to make a sweeping change to like the paradigm of what we live in if we're not going to first work with what needs to shift within ourselves. And it really is like, it doesn't have to be grand gestures like you mentioned. It's these little things that really can have a monumental impact.
Oh my God, everything resonates because it is so true. I always say, like, people say, "Ah, I want to change the world." I'm like, you got to start with you, because when you change you, like we, are aware of, then it's a ripple effect. It creates a ripple effect, and the
Mm-hmm.
world you want to create, that's the world you can create with by changing yourself first, because everybody has a different, I guess, concept of what they want in their reality, right? Somebody might be really interested in doing paintings. Somebody else wants to go travel the world, so you find, like you said, find your community. And I think, don't you agree, like the importance of having a community? Because yes, a lot of times we want to do things by ourselves, especially when we deal with mental, right, depression, anxiety, and you don't want to share it because you feel, oh my God, I'm the only one. But then you find a community and suddenly you're helping someone else, and you make them feel seen, and you realize, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways out of this, right? Because trauma is real. Let's face it, most of us life is not easy. And
Mm-hmm.
many grew up with like really a lot of challenges as children, whether at home or in school, and even as an adult, right? Then you're out in the world by yourself, and you're dealing with people that might not be as kind. They don't understand you, or you're like a little bit off, not off, but like I always felt like I don't fit in. That's what I mean. Like, you're not like the normal people that you think. What is even normal? I don't really know,
Yeah.
but you know what I'm saying? Like certain people that, oh, you're thinking so different, and you start thinking that, wow, must be something wrong with you. And to embrace
Mm-hmm.
that, to really embrace that.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell someone to say, "Oh, I'm not creative and I don't have it in me." Where do you think, what would you tell them? Like, because are you teaching?
Mm.
Are you sharing your gifts already with the world where you
Yeah. I work with, look, it's highly creative people are kind of drawn to me, but I'm not limited to working with people who are creative. I have
Yeah.
a couple of pathways. So I am this year I'm starting restarting a
Yay.
podcast called Practice and Process.
Oh, like that.
And that is purely to support creatives, more so from that what I call the practice side, which is I consider that to be more the professional development, like applying for a grant, like here's this kind of mindset, like real
Oh,
practical grounding kind of tips about like, okay, let's reframe, like, because something that everyone would say, like if they are creative, and I'll circle back to people who might not identify as creative, but something that I hear so many creatives say is, oh, like applications are so hard. And I agree, and I've been there, but my practice was very application heavy because I worked in public space. So everything, you know, I did have studios, but I worked on projects. So I had this strong kind of project management approach. And I kind of have my method for breaking things down methodically to go, well, hang on, the mindset of like everything is hard, you got to flip that and go, how can I make it easier for myself? So I'm developing resources and taking people through those kind of processes of being methodical and thinking through practice so that you can develop that capacity to calibrate things for yourself, because you're constantly doing it, right? Like you don't just get to a point where everything's flowing and everything's neat. It comes in waves. And what I had noticed, beyond the healing, like trauma, like healing, like there's so many layers of healing. And one of the
yeah.
things that my creativity healed for me was that socialization aspect of like, okay, you might not see yourself as existing in community or collaborating, but if you want to have a show, you've got to deal with the there might be a curator, there might be other people involved in organizing it, there might be other artists, and you might have to like have those touchstones. So I developed a lot of communication skills through my practice that had kind of been a bit of a gap for me. So that practice and process brand is, you know, really focused on resourcing creatives with the mindset and practical skills to support their creative development. And just as myself, as Fae West, I love to support people with their connecting with their self-expression, you know. So I combine the art therapy modality with coaching, you know, to sort of say, look, where are you, where do you want to go, let's create that path. How do we create that path? And
Mhm.
when I encounter people who, you know, feel like they don't identify as creative, or they feel like then I don't have much space to be creative in my life, like what you mentioned before, I like to remind people that creativity isn't necessarily about output. So, you know, recalibrating, like where is that belief coming from that I like to be creative means to be able to draw in a photorealistic style, which is a huge one for a lot of people. Like a lot of people are hung up on the idea that they're not creative or they're not artistic because they, you know, oh, my brother was a better drawer than me, or I couldn't draw in this. Like representational art is one tiny piece of like this endless horizon of possibilities. Having a podcast is a creative journey, you know. It's a like even the little things, like you create your space and
Mhm.
you're doing that unconsciously, or you can choose to center yourself in that energy with intention, and then through that, you know, access that deeper sense of power and agency because you're bringing that intent there. So I think for anyone who says that they're not creative, I would say, you know, let's open up that horizon of possibilities about what is creative and first, and then, you know, where can you bring in that intention, and then the third step is really like, where do you need to let yourself play a bit? You know,
Mhm.
how's your relationship? If you're not creative, how's your relationship to your inner child? Like, have they just been like kind of like you've left them locked in a room for a while? Because there's everyone, when you press a bit, everyone of every age has something that they've always wanted to do, or something that they used to do that they got so much out of. And I find that so interesting because I've spoken to so many people about that relationship that they have to creativity, right? Like, and it's a pattern that I've seen over and over and over again, is that it's either locked into it being like has to be a certain way, or there's something that they're holding back from.
I think it's also the perfectionism aspect, right? People think they have to be
Mhm.
perfect with everything they do, and maybe they're really successful in their job, so they know that, oh, I cannot share, and you don't even have to share your art. This is not even for anyone to see if
You
you don't
can
want
make
to.
just for you, yeah.
Exactly, you know. I mean, even vision boarding, I love that because that is so creative when
Hmm.
you, like you were saying, in vision, I'm all about, creating like a clutter-free environment. For me, I cannot create when I'm around by clutter. And that's another thing because you are just so, maybe you haven't made in your mind space to create, right? And when it's clutter over here, and I've been there, I know, and I'm sure you have
Hmm.
too, where we just,
Yep.
I don't know where to start, and you start like a little bit, just like clean up your space or make room for a creative project, that shifts
Mm.
everything. Wouldn't you agree? Like that mindset is like so crucial for really anything.
Absolutely. And I love that you're drawing that connection between, you know, that there's physical space and there's also the mental space that we can create. A step that I see that I definitely went through and I've seen mirrored in other people is going like, oh, well, I don't have space. And it's like, well, where do you not have space? Do you physically not have space? Because most practices, most can be adapted to being realized, you know, and it might not, and this is that perfection thing coming in. I'll wait until I have the perfect space, you know, I'll wait until my, you know, kids clear their crap out of the garage so that I can claim that back. Like there's a hesitation to, and I think this is kind of what's behind that, is the way that with creativity there's a fear of taking up space. And that is this
Mm.
physical thing that people can have, but it's actually, you got to deal with the mental side of it first, you know. It's a decision. So I have a kind of, it's something that's always, I always put it on the back burner. I always wanted to paint when I was a child, the creative practice that I wanted to do, and I know why this, it connects into these um really cathartic experiences as a child of like painting at preschool, and it stayed with me. And I've got an easel here, you know, but it's sort of like I don't have the space. But then I know that it's because I haven't chosen to make that decision to go, you know what, I'm going to do it no matter what. You know, so I might do like a really small series of paintings, or go and paint plein air, paint outside. Like if you want to create it, you can find a way, but you might have to get creative about the way that you realize it. And that's part of the process. And it's part of that first step of opening yourself to going, you know, another thing that I'm interested in is like, having worked in public space, like I would love to work on monuments and build
Mm.
monuments, you know, but to things that are part of the paradigm that I would like to see. And there's a lot of like, that has all these political connotations, and it has all of these barriers to accessing that. Like I can't just go and make a massive sculpture, because a monument is more than a sculpture too. Like I can't just go and take up public space,
Mm.
but I can, because it's how do I choose to do that, you know, and can I invert that, right? Like and this was suggested to me by, I think it was when I was just engaging with like some free programming around public space, and it was these architects talking, and it was a very different kind of
Mm.
practice for architects to share about the city and public space in the way they saw it compared to artists. Like it was this interesting alternative perspective, and there was this, some a suggestion of inversion, you know, like, so if I can't go and make this monumental thing like on a monumental scale, can you make something on a smaller scale but
Mm-hmm.
allow that to speak to that concept of a monument? And I think this is where we can really start to give ourselves permission to step into the creativity and to let go of the perfectionism of going, how else could it be? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and because our world makes us go like, okay, A to B, A to B to blah 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 to Z. Like it's very linear, but creative thinking is not linear. Creative process is not linear. Creative practice is not linear. And when we unshackle ourselves from that linearity, sometimes taking that first step has to be us getting creative about giving ourselves permission to realize an idea or a kind of medium that we want to work with in a different way.
That's a big one too, giving yourself permission.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because a
Because
lot of
no,
times no one's stopping you. It's just you stopping you. A lot of times, you know.
and no one else is gonna give you that permission. Like there's not going to be, like no one's going to come knocking on your door one day, and if you don't give yourself that permission, it doesn't matter what feedback you get, because you won't let it drive you or move you in the same way of when you stop and you face those parts of yourself that are holding you back.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely that I had to go through this. Yeah, I really grappled quite intensively with parts of myself and permission, and the creativity for me, the creative path was this way of allowing that to surface. and recognizing that those mental patterns, those psychological patterns were there and impacting me in other parts of my life. But when they surfaced in my creativity, it was really confronting. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard. But it but what it was sort of like it was me alone with myself and that practice. And that's where I really found like, well, here's where I get to change it. And so when I would grapple with those parts of myself in my practice, then the more I did that, the more the other parts of my life changed too, because that part wasn't just there stopping me from making the art that I wanted to make. It was stopping me from having conversations with people. It was stopping me from setting boundaries with people, right? Like that part that we need to face in order to give ourselves permission is often preventing us from doing a lot of other things in our life as well.
I agree because everything's connected. Everything's
Mm-hmm.
so connected. And when we shut ourselves off from something, especially something creative, I feel that it's, oh my God, I forgot where I was reading it. I'm going to butcher it, but it was something about when we just go about what we're supposed to be doing, what the society is telling you what to do, right? You just get this job and you go to your job, you make the money, you're never going to have enough. You just buy all the things that you think you need. And your soul, at some point, you get so tired because your soul is tired of not being in
Mm-hmm.
alignment with who you came here to be. And so that's why people often say, like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted. I'm not creative. I don't have any energy. Yes, because all your energy goes into the places that don't feed you anything back. When
Mm-hmm.
you start being creative, then suddenly you're just nurturing your garden of prosperity and ideas, and it's a muscle. Allow yourself to suck at first.
Yes.
Who cares? Because it's a muscle. When I first started writing music, and I still don't write every song is not a great song. Sometimes it's horrible. You know what I mean? But you're letting it out and you're allowing yourself to just sing off key, to paint wrong, and or not even wrong, but do your thing. And you know what? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
somebody might be, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. This is
That is so
subjective.
true.
Everything is so subjective, right?
It's so true. What we criticize ourselves for, we have to remember that to someone else, that's incredible, and I think reclaiming that um, freedom to experiment, to explore, to be curious through self expression,
Yes.
it really is, you know, people speak of it as like inner child work. And to some extent, it is because a lot of wounding around not feeling free to do that can come from childhood,
Hmm.
but you're not being childlike. It's just that the child is more connected to that authentic self-expression. It's not hasn't had all of the beliefs and patterning, kind of pile on, and it's a coming back to yourself. And it's not about, I think some people kind of dismiss it as like it's frivolous or it's childlike, but it absolutely isn't. It's just innate to who we are, I believe, as human beings, like having this like human experience, physical experience. And like you were saying, when we get wrapped up in circumstances where, and for a lot of people, like those circumstances can be like that, it's tough. Like that is what is required in order to survive. But what I sort of had to learn, and I think this is the role that creativity played for me in being that beacon, that there was a huge shift. So I won't go into details or anything, and it is like a heavier kind of topic, but I spent from the age of like the earliest thoughts I had were very young. And then from being a teenager through until my late 20s, I cyclically did not want to be here, and that was a huge weight to carry around. It felt like I was a burden to the world, and it was difficult for me to share when I was going through a cycle with those feelings. And I also felt exhausted by them, like trapped. Like it was sort of like, is this feeling ever going to end? You know, like,
Mm.
or is that the path that I really need to take because I just want to escape? And then I started creating, you know, and I still had all of the trauma. I was really only, even though I'd had some support up until that point, it was only when I committed to my creativity that I started to really unpack a lot of my stuff. And from that point, even though I'd gone on to, I've had a few like adulthood traumatic experiences as well. I never went back into that pattern
Mm.
of thought. You know, it was once it's sort of like I felt like I plugged something in. I'd re-plugged back into this life force, and that the creative energy really is this life force, and it's just there waiting for us to plug into it, regardless of what our circumstances are, so that we can, you know, when we're like working a job that we don't want to be in, and like facing like this kind of like mountainous task of surviving in this post-capitalist world,
Yeah.
we kind of have to submit and surrender to a lot of things, but we also have to like find that point of connection, so that through connecting to our own life force kind of energy, our own creative energy, that's where we can vision and support ourselves, and like grow, like you mentioned, like kind of like fortify our energy to allow it to come through us, to help us transition through our various circumstances.
I love that. And surrendering is so much more than, it's not, people sometimes confuse surrendering with giving up. And surrendering is just allowing, allowing ourselves to be open to all the good things that come in instead of forcing it, right? Because as a creative, a lot of times I think that people have that mindset, and I can very much relate with my music. Oh, I can't make a living with my art. I can't, and so they constantly have this push and pull where they go do a job, then they come home and they might be depleted because they used up all the energy, for that work. So my question for you is, how did it
Mm,
feel, and how did you manage to go from something to support yourself, to make money, to really becoming into who you are, your creativity, and allowing
mm,
yourself to make money with your art, find that
mm.
thing.
In the beginning, you know, and it's a journey, and it's such a great question. I really appreciate you asking that question. Um, this is where I think, particularly creative. So this is really something, I think it's valuable for everyone, but I think when someone wants to have, so to not to discount, like, and just to sort of not put aside, but just to mention that there's that other side of things where some people have their career that they have, and then they're happy to have creativity as hobbies, or they know that it's a passion and purpose for them, but they're happy to have that woven into the fabric of all that they do. And then there are those of us who just identify as artists, as creatives, as musicians, as, you know, theatre makers in whatever capacity. You know, we're a creative and we want to have a creative career. I think the anyone has to deal with their own narratives about money and business if you want to run a business. But I think creatives in particular, you have to deal with your own personal narrative, but you also have to deal with the weight of the dominant narrative and the way that that anchors the whole kind of starving artist myth for a lot of us. And what I've observed over time and how it changed for me. So in the beginning for me, I tell you what, it was just sheer determination and will and force that saw me forging that path, and a bit of opportunity, which I also see as kind of serendipitous. So I had started to experiment with the weaving, and I happened to be at the time like engaged in creative community. I was living in a communal way, like with 15 people. And I did that a couple of different times. And that was so enriching. And so from that
Mm.
environment, where I was also surrounded by creatives of all different kinds, and everyone's life had a bit of a sliding scale of some people were 100% in their practice supporting themselves from that. Other people had, their creative work, but they had the like jobs where they used those creative skills. Like some people were graphic designers, but they were also like their creative practice was like film, but kind of very graphic or
Mm.
animation, right? And then there were other people that had a big contrast where they had creative practice and creative work, but they did work that they didn't really want to do in order to make that a reality. And living around that breadth was really freeing because
Mm.
everyone actually had different perspectives on it. Some people, and I've been like this at times in my life, like I'm happy to have another job or role that kind of grounds me financially while I explore and experiment with my creativity. And what I noticed, my pick a path kind of happened because I got a public art project and I was paid for it. And
That's
I'd always
awesome.
been told and taught that you won't get paid, to make like you'll make art and you'll never sell it. You'll make
Mm.
art and you won't get paid for it. And then I was like, hang on, these people, if I practice in this way, they will pay me before I've even made the work. And it was this very conscious decision to go, I'm going to work in public space in this way because I can access the funding, and it comes with its own challenges and it's come with its own um, path to navigate in terms of my creative identity. And I'm working with a mentor for myself now, and could have we had this session where we're like, okay, what does creativity look like for me in that space beyond the brief, because I'm very good at responding to someone else's parameters, but what if I had no parameters, what would I create, kind of thing. And then I hit a place where I recognized a patterning for myself with my relationship to money and business and conducting, my creative practice as a business. And I was like, this is absurd. And I started to make these connections to actually my money story personally is really intertwined with a lot of trauma
Mm.
from my childhood and a lot of, coercive control that was perpetrated both towards my mother and the family as a whole, and then also to me individually. And I was like, wow, like this is massive. And it's a huge undertaking. Like I've been invested in that work and that sorting process and recalibrating process for many years, and it has frustrated me with the gap between seeing certain patterns and then making adjustments, healing, releasing, priming for new patterns, and just the endurance that's required. And that's my sort of take on it as a creative. Like you can do one of two things the way that I see it. You can stick your head in the sand about, your financial, like your relationship to money and how that impacts your practice, or you can go, what, this is a long road, but I'm going to keep walking it. I'm going to keep turning towards it.
Man, this is everything you're saying. I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Because it's nothing is ever perfect. And I think even just meditation, I love meditating, and sometimes I sit there and I just can't get myself to meditate. It's not something, or yoga, it's not something that, oh, you wake up tomorrow and you're going to be amazing and everything is perfect. It's not about the perfection. It's about the progress and things that we do for a long time. We still struggle with things. And as you grow, new challenges come. And I think I love the fact that
Mhm.
you found something. It's so easy to just play the victim. it's so easy to just say, okay, my life sucks. My childhood was horrible. Everybody's stories. It's like, so what now what, right? And you turning it around and having really like over a decade of struggle, and still being here and see how far you've come. I think this is such a brave thing to do, personal development and working on yourself. And that's just I think that's why we came here. We all, as humans on this earth, we all came here with our with baggage, and for whatever reason you were given that, I was given other things. And but man, we have the power and the capacity, if we
Mm-hmm.
really can see through it, to break through it. And yes, it's going to be hard sometimes. And yes, it's going to be painful sometimes, and it's going to be frustrating. Not every day positive thinking, right? Yes, I'm like, yeah, life is good. But sometimes you just want to scream in a pillow, or punch it,
Sometimes you need to,
and that's
like,
therapeutic
I
too.
mhm. And I think I love what you said about, you know, where like playing the victim, like that it's easier to play the victim. And this is a bit edgy. Like this will, I feel like some creatives might be like, oh,
I
and
love
be a
edgy.
bit
Bring
offended
it.
here. But I see so many creatives play the victim to that
Yes.
dominant narrative about it's hard to be an artist, right? Okay, that's a fact. So what are you going to do about it? And that's what I had to go through in myself. I kept finding myself saying, oh, this is so hard, this is so hard. And I was like, this isn't helping me, is it? I'm just reinforcing where it's hard, where it's difficult, and I'm submitting to that narrative unless I choose to say, you know what, it's also, so you got two hards. It's hard to be surrendered or submitted into that in like an unhealthy way, in a victimhood way. It's also hard to build beyond it. But I'd rather choose that hard because it has a sense of direction. And what I found was as I chose that hard, the horizon of possibilities expanded for support in all forms, for support for how was I supporting myself in overcoming those beliefs? How was I supporting myself in overcoming the past traumas that were connected to and the origins of those beliefs? And then, even in my practice, I noticed a huge shift in the kind of opportunities that were available to me once I had made that leap to say, you know what, I'm choosing my heart and I'm going to choose to create
Mm.
out of that, to move away from that dominant narrative, to the point that I was like getting in arguments because I left art school years ago, like I mentioned, and then I practiced and I kind of found my way, without having like finalized a degree, but I came to a whole other set of circumstances that pulled me into a degree um, that I only finished in 2021, so not
Mm-hmm.
that long ago. And I kind of got into arguments with some of the lecturers, who were teaching that, like they're practicing artists and they're teaching, and what they're saying to young, 18, 19-year olds is it's hard to be an artist, but they weren't giving them the mindset or the tools to move through that and create beyond that. And I was so angry. I was like, don't teach them this,
Yes.
teach them that it's possible for them and that it's up to them as individuals to choose their own path. And it's confusing and it's confronting because it requires looking at it's more than money. And I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
such a huge breakthrough that I had, because I always used to say too, like, oh, I'm creative, I'm not good with money. And then I was like, okay, well, I've got to take responsibility there. Like, is that the reality that I want to create? And then I was like, what part of money am I not good with? Like, we use these generalizations and blankets like that narrative. And even when people go, oh, I can't do that because I'm a perfectionist, I can't do that because I procrastinate, it's a blanket. approach in a lot of cases that stops us from looking at the details, that stops us from looking at the particulars, because when we get detailed, when we get into the particulars, when we get specific, that's when we can actually implement strategies, tools, approaches, or we identify like specifically what needs to be healed. Because there's a big difference between someone saying, oh, I need to be better with my money, and someone saying, well, actually, the challenge that I face, like one of the biggest challenges, is that I leave all of my bookkeeping, for my tax to the last minute. So it becomes this hurdle every year and I avoid it, and it brings me a lot of stress, right? Which was
Yeah.
one of my cycles, with my creativity. And I'd be like there with my shoebox full of receipts trying to catalog everything. So it's not until we kind of dip beneath those blanket statements that we can start to find the threads that we need to pick up, and how we can pick them up in different ways and new ways, rather than just like the pattern will keep weaving itself unless we find our sense of agency, which I think has been this huge like theme in our conversation, and connect into that and go, no, I'm going to create this new pattern.
Yeah. That's what it is. That's what growth is, right? It's like we always want to. I always say I feel really uncomfortable when I'm feeling comfortable. You know what I mean? Because
Mm-hmm.
then I feel I am in this where I'm not growing, I'm not challenging myself, where I and that can also be when people say, well, I'm not creative, or I don't have it, or I'm depressed and I can't get myself to do anything, which I completely understand. However,
Mm-hmm.
when you just do little steps, right, just like a tiny little thing, then you create that momentum and you feel that little spark shining through, and you know what, there's something there. And then it's just a matter of you get going at it, and not giving up, not stepping away, saying, and it's easy to do. That's when it comes back down to what we were talking earlier, community. When you have a circle of friends or a community that's super supportive. I also like when you were saying that you lived in a community environment, because I think that is always so nurturing and healing when you have the right people come together. And I
Yeah,
see this as a
that's
future,
cool.
because we don't want to, people crave connection. People want to belong somewhere in a very authentic way. And they don't want to just pretend, oh, I just want to fit in somewhere. You want to find your tribe, people that have maybe gone through something similar, that can understand. Because a lot of times people, I mean, we see it in politics, where people just talk. They don't even listen to one another. They just, have their opinion, and they just are so caught up in their whatever is going on in there, that they can't even open their mind to, maybe I should just listen to somebody else, and they can't understand it. And we all come from different backgrounds, so we all have our own story that is part of why we react to certain things a certain way. And until you know
Yes.
that person, right, until we know, we can't judge that person, and we can just make assumptions that they are not creative or that they're not talented, because they might be geniuses that just haven't brought
Mm-hmm.
this to life, because they've been just so, beaten down and beaten up, that they have to peel those layers off. And that is brave, that is vulnerable. And artists, every artist out there is very brave, to just put yourself out there, put
100%.
yourself out there. So give yourself, big like thumbs up and flowers for that, because not everybody is brave enough to do that. And that is inspiring, when you see
It
someone
really
else.
is.
Because what you were saying earlier,
It,
permission, now you're giving someone else permission, you know
yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we also have to recognize that we might not ever know, that permission that we give others, we might not get that feedback.
hmm
And I think I'm trying to, it's sort of, there's a few threads in what you were sharing and saying too, that they're just trying to land, and I'll just talk it out. I'll get to the kind of center. Something that I think will be it is becoming, and there's some people, you know, really recognizing this and working towards this, but something that's so essential for our future together, I see, and the stages that we're going through in our existence is we've really lost the capacity to sit with the discomfort of multiple perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And truth is not singular. Truth is a multiplicity of perspectives. And we can, as individuals, actually feel more validated in our singular kind of perspective when we are willing to, you know, I think that that's part of the paradox of it, right? Is acknowledging our own truth comes from acknowledging the multiplicity of truths that we see around us. And those communal living experiences were times where I really had to have a lot of courage and take a lot of risks and be very vulnerable, but also be humbled by the way that, you know, when there'd be kind of a conflict, but you'd go around the room and everyone had a different, slightly different perspective on it. And some people were just like, that doesn't matter at all. And then other people were outraged and they'd align with, one of the other people. But then other people would be like, well, I can see this from both sides here, and it's not that way of communicating and being was very fluid and organic in those environments, and it didn't always like result. There was never a fucking neat, pretty bow on things,
Yeah.
and I think that's an illusion that we tend to seek, right? Like in a lot of cases. But our workplaces and the dominant kind of structures of workplaces and the way that they're set up, or even the creative industries and the way that it's navigated, and there's a lot of imbalances of power throughout the creative industries
Yes.
where there's this fracturing of that, and there isn't time or space for that, and people aren't, I don't want to say that people don't have the skills to do it, because I believe that we do, but we're not being held in spaces where we get to experiment and fortify those skills. And I really believe that it's a responsibility of creatives to carve that, because creative experiences, even if you look at it, like the experience of someone coming and receiving a performance, a music performance, if you surveyed that crowd, there'd be people who have different kind of belief
Mm-hmm.
systems, right? And contrasting and comparing, so that creativity and creative experiences, whether as part of the audience or as a participant, can be so leveling and enriching for people, and can give us that pathway to fortify those skills of communication and collaboration. And like you mentioned, there's the courage that it takes to be a creative, because there's a leadership that's involved in that. We're going first. And even if your work isn't about seeking those outcomes, that inspiration to others can really be there, and you just may never know how it's impacting people.
Absolutely. And I like the whole thing about communication, because I think people just I feel sometimes in the creative field, especially in the industry, where it's very, you know, you have to think a certain way to be able to be accepted, and I feel that this whole thing needs to shift, like you were saying, where the communication needs to be more there, and the being tolerant of other people's opinions, and again, the upbringing, right, because really finding out who these people are. Who are you? Why are you thinking that way? Asking questions, and then maybe understanding why somebody comes from that place, versus just judging someone by, you have pink hair, you obviously must be, this or that, or think that way. And you don't know me, so I'm like, you cannot judge me by the way I look, my appearance. um and we all do it. I mean, we're judgmental people, it's our nature in a way. But then most of us, especially artists, I think we are more open. You would think they're more open. So it's so important. I so agree. And art is just, I think, can be a great icebreaker, or like a conversation starter, to be a bit more, to have a bit more of a different perspective. And that can be a piece of art that just makes you go, what is that? It's a little, maybe a little bit disturbing. Even I have a friend who, he paints with his blood. And
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy, when he does this, it's really dark, and his music is super dark. And I mean, super dark. And then he lived in France, in Paris, and he was teaching these kids how to paint, and to be accepted as a teacher, even though he was doing this really dark art, like, I mean, painting demons and devils. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was so cool that he was able to still be a teacher. They could have said, "Well, we don't want we don't want you
Too
around,"
much. Yeah.
But I thought it was such a cool contrast. He doesn't do it anymore now, but I just thought it was so. I've never met anyone like that who does what he does, and he's doing really well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just, I love seeing that, and I think that art is creativity in any kind of shape and form is just the best therapy there is, because sometimes you go to a therapist and nothing changes because you keep talking about the same things. And at some point, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've actually never really taken therapy, but like, I've had friends who would be like, "Oh, my therapist." I'm like, "Well, how long have you been going? Why are you still having the same issues? You should be free from that." And of course, a lot of them then end up just taking all kinds of medications that they think is going to be the solution, which it never really is. I think, using art as your medication, or meditation, as I like to say, as your medication, is a way better
Mm.
route.
Yeah, that way there's something. What comes to mind when you share that is this really interesting experience that I had through my training in art therapy, where that college also had a cohort who were training as transpersonal counselors. And like, the kind of etymology of that word, transpersonal means like beyond the self, right? And it doesn't, so it was, uh, really, it kind of connects to the word spiritual. It is sometimes used by people interchangeably, but it was more about, working with practices and influences outside of, traditional Western psychology, and acknowledging that there are long-standing traditions and practices in other cultures and different, pockets of culture. So this is, it's kind of a bit of an aside, but when people experience psychosis in Western, um, contexts and Western countries, the kind of, it's hard to measure recovery, right? Like, and
Right.
this is all, I don't have the studies on hand, but it's genuinely studied and referenced. The recovery rate and period of time is much lower than in polytheistic Eastern countries. So, countries that have religions that have multiple gods and goddesses and stories around that, people recover. Like, psychosis isn't medicalized and it isn't pathologized. It's actually more accepted because it has this kind of like transpersonal context for it. And I found that fascinating. And I think that that gives a bit of insight into what transpersonal is and what it means, and how it's going, like, okay, well, how can we draw on these different perspectives of seeing someone's mental and health as a holistic kind of picture, where their upbringing and background and experiences, and whether they have religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs too, also form a part of that. So there was a cohort of counselors. So they were studying in that kind of transpersonal frameworks, but just studying counseling rather than art therapy. And we got to a point in the course where we traded sessions. because the course was very experiential. So you had a lot of practice with fellow students playing the role of a client for you. So we kind of became each other's clients. And of in a group of 15 people, you know, the counseling cohort was 15, and then we were about 15 as the art therapists. They all sat there and they were just like, I think it was maybe only one or two people in that group, but the most of that group, they were all like, we want to learn the art therapy now. That they were just like, there's
Wow,
something
yeah.
else that it brings into the conversation, because it takes you, it takes you both in and down into your subconscious, but it can also bring resources in, you know, from these both places, from deep within or beyond.
Mm.
And that's what I love, that creativity is this bridge. You know, the other parts of our conversation, when we're talking about the mindset and the beliefs and those dominant narratives, well, all of the roots for all of that is in our subconscious, you know. And our why creativity held such a transformative power is because it's a bridge. It's a very, it's a way to go like, okay, well, I need to go downstairs and like clean up some things down there. Art's going to get you there, or you know, whether whatever kind of creative expression can take you there a lot faster. Like it's like taking the elevator rather than the stairs. And it gives you that ability to, you know, whether it's releasing or whether it's like encoding, you know, new experiences, or whether it's that cathartic kind of experience. And a lot of people experience that through music, right? Like music moves us. Music, even if it isn't intended to be, can be such an emotionally rich experience for people that allows them to feel validated in their emotions. And you know, so we're aware of that power. But I think what I like think is so, like, what I want is for everyone to know that they can access that power for themselves.
Mm. That is so powerful and such a great way to kind of start winding down the conversation. That is so juicy right there. You know, because everybody has access to it. It's like air. We all have access to it. You can just take a nice deep breath in, and hopefully you're in a place where it's nice and fresh, you know. But it's
Yes.
available for all of us. And sometimes we need that little nudge for someone to say, hey, you know, just give it a shot. Just try it for fun. Because
Mm-hmm.
fun, I think when you perceive or see things as a fun thing, like you were mentioning earlier too, letting your inner child out and play, it doesn't mean that you have to be acting like a 5-year old. But it's like, man, what did I used to do that I really, honestly, when it's snowing out, I like to be the 5-year old and throw myself in the snow. I just love that. Or like doing
Oh,
cartwheels, you know,
so
because I
fun.
think it's just so fun. And it's just something the inner child comes out and I'm like, I don't care. I don't care how stupid I look right now. Or, you know, I don't care. I just want to have fun right now because I love nature. And I think nature is so therapeutic. And it's when we connect
Mm-hmm.
to it, it brings us back to our essentials, because the last thing we want to do is spend all day on social media, which social media is amazing. It's amazing, but it can also get you in a space where you just keep consuming, which I, for a minute I did that and I was like, you know, I gotta stop consuming. I love learning and I love watching all these YouTube videos, but I'm like, man, I gotta put my own stuff out there too, you know. I mean, I need to make
Yeah.
time for that. And so people,
Mm-hmm.
I want everyone to just take some time for themselves to you know, whether it's an hour a day, half an hour a day, 15 minutes a day, to do something that really nurtures you and makes you express yourself in whatever that means, whatever way, even if it's going for a walk, you know,
Yes.
and skipping, who cares?
Because like he said, like going for that, like even like something I like to think about is movement
Yes.
is a foundation for all kinds of creativity. Like even when you're singing, your vocal cords, like you're moving your body, you're using your breath through that vessel of your body. And beyond dancing, you know, which is that very, like, it obviously it is about movement, everything creative kind of has its genesis in a movement of some kind, and that's a patterning often as well. And I think in our daily lives, it's like drink our coffee, type on the thing, be on the phone. Like our movements can become so ingrained in such a pattern. So even the action of going for a walk, but like letting yourself reach up and like reach out towards a beautiful flower and touch like a flower on the tree, or pick up a stick or a leaf that draws your attention, because you can just put it back down, like, but allowing your body to be responding and reacting to the whatever nature is available to you, because it's such a bigger conversation. I won't go
Yeah.
into it, but the like nature is still woven into our cities, and in a way our cities are kind of have become like they're still part of our environment. They have become like, it's this really bigger conversation about what is nature, like where does nature begin. And I think that taps more into as well, like, where do we begin and end in our environments that we move through, and how can we move through them with that bit more intentionality, so that we can tap into some of that sense of novelty, that
Mm-hmm.
can help us break out of those patterns.
Mm. Love that. What is your project that you're working on right now, and what should people know about you, and where can people find you?
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So, in a couple of weeks, I have a show opening here in Nam. I'm really excited because it's the first video installation work that I have shown and kind of realized in a full scale. And that is called Current. So, it's
Oh,
about situating oneself, and it draws inspiration from me learning about the currents and cycles of the oceans, which are obviously shifting and changing as we speak. Um, but wanting people to locate themselves within a space of, well, what does that mean for me internally, and what is it that I like, that I might need to go into my deep kind of subconscious, unconscious, to collect something that either is transforming or needs to be transformed. And I practice as Elizabeth West. So I have an artist name. So my Instagram is elizabethwest.studio. And I'll be sharing a lot of documentation of the lead up to that work, as well as when it is on exhibition. I'm thinking about doing a sort of like a video kind of walk through. It's not a
oh
huge
yes.
space, but just kind of be able to capture what that experience could be like for audiences who can't be there. And I am also on Instagram as I am Fae West, and that's where I share um, inspiration and resources, and offerings to work with people who want to tap into the transformative power of creativity and reclaim their self-expression.
Oh, I love that. That is awesome. So yes, we can find you there. What's your favorite cup of beverage in the morning? What's your favorite?
Ah, um, I have right here with me an Earl Grey tea. So I take my tea with just a touch of milk
Mm.
and some honey as well.
And what's your guilty pleasure?
Oh, anything sweet, and like sweets after dinner. I'm just a sucker for, and yeah, I know that it's kind of caused by like a bit of a blood sugar drop, but I love sweets. Last night we had a brownie, but then I also had like
Mm.
a yogurt that had some flavored toppings in it as well.
I know. I started doing that too, and I'm like, why did I make this a habit after dinner? I'm like,
I know,
I
but
need
because
something
once it
sweet.
becomes a habit, it's hard to break. And I'm seeing the habit emerge, and I'm like, no, you have to drink water after dinner time.
Yeah. I'm like, just eat a strawberry.
Yeah.
It's not the same, not quite, but it can be satisfying as well. And what is your last piece of advice for anyone who is listening that, says, man, I love your story. Like, how can I? They might be so inspired by you because I love your story so much. It's so inspiring. And I love your mindset because it's just so, you're so open to, and also so humble. You've accomplished a lot, but you're still so humble and always acting from a place of learning more and not, knowing everything. I think that's always so refreshing when people say, I'm looking forward to digging deeper and finding more things, right? And growing even more out of where I am right now. I think that is how we evolve and how we keep growing and inspire, like we talked
Mm,
about earlier, inspire and, motivate others. What's your one piece of
thank you so
advice?
much. It's so lovely to receive your reflection on that, and I've been so grateful for this space that you've created, to be able to share my story. I feel like, you know, some people, probably not your audience, but when I encounter some people, and even with my artwork, and when I really start to speak about it, a lot of people recoil a little bit, and something that a lot of people say to me is like, wow, you're really deep, you know? And I think there's a lot of people, and I don't mean this as a criticism, because I think it's a space I've had to learn how to be in, but a lot of people live on the surface, and my advice would be like, don't be afraid of going a bit deeper and diving deep, and allowing things to surface through that process. Set yourself up a tether. You can tether yourself to the surface, like a buoy kind of sits on the surface of the water, but it's like anchored down. Like, you've got that line, and trust yourself that you can bring yourself back up out of it. But you, like, knowing your own depth, and using creativity as a tool to kind of reach into your own depths, yeah, there's a lot that can offer you.
Wow. That is the perfect ending because this is so true. Where and you never know, when you're afraid to jump in the water and then you suddenly jump and you go, wow, that was amazing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's the things that we are scared of. Once you do it, you're like, wow, that was actually not scary. That was very
Mm-hmm.
enlightening actually and inspiring. Oh, I love that so much. What great advice. Well, thank you for
Mm.
being my guest and for sharing so much powerful and valuable, you know, stories that I know other people will be inspired by, and you giving them permission to just start their work, whatever that might be, or at least just nudge that inner child and say, come on, let's go play.
Mm-hmm. Just take a step, take the next step.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. And people can find you, and I will be in touch. And maybe in the near future, we might be even doing something together. Who knows, you know? You never know.
Yeah,
Endless
thank you
possibilities.
so much.
You're very
This has
welcome.
been so amazing. It's been such a wonderful conversation, Jacqueline.
Yes,
Thank
it has
you.
been. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode with Faye. She is such an amazing, inspiring person, and make sure that you check out her links. And I will have some show notes that you can check out where we talked about some points that she made that were so powerful. And hopefully, you will apply those as well. And I wish you nothing but the best. Always follow your passion, your dreams, and your bliss, and have an amazing rest of your day. If you are interested in my declutter program, you can check that out at pinkstarmusic.com. And with that said, I'm going to see you at the next one. Take care.
Patience is gold. I know. Hurry up, I got no time to be wasting. I'm reaching high was enraged, stop being enraged.